welcome to another episode of Getting Hammered. I am once again in Milwaukee for the Republican National Convention. My co-host Vic Mattis of the Washington Free Beacon is back in Washington observing from there. We are your morning show for any hour. I am a little over-caffeinated and possibly underprepared this morning. Let's get to it, man. There's a lot going on. What's going on with you, though, Vic?
Hello, Mary Catherine. As you know, this is what we like to call in D.C. the dog days of summer where nothing is happening. And generally, sorry to make you spit your coffee there. And generally, that's the case because since COVID, of course, nobody has come back to work, as you know, right? The vacancy rates are through the roof, and everything is, I'm seeing more and more, for lease signs, which is very depressing. But on top of that, we have the Republican convention, so everybody is bugged out of town. And unlike Milwaukee, which sounds like it's a bustling place, so things are fine here. What is going on there? Have you gotten a chance to go around Milwaukee yet? Did you take like the tour of the Schatz Brewery from Laverne and Shirley? I mean, what's going on?
No, I've not done that. As you know, at a convention, things are a little weird with security because particularly this year, as you might imagine, security changes every day. So you don't exactly know where you can go until you're there. And in the 90-degree heat yesterday, you didn't want to venture too far without knowing where you could go. You also don't know where Ubers can pick you up because that changes frequently too. Although we tried that and the app was telling us where to go to get a car. So I finally did a little exploring last night, and Guy and I went to a very nice dinner, which is our custom when we are out of town together, is that we go and spend our per diem on a nice dinner together. So we went to Loopy and Iris, which is a very nice place featured on Top Chef. There was I didn't realize, I've sort of fallen off watching Top Chef, but there was a Top Chef Wisconsin, and it featured the state very well. Guy says he's a big fan, so he watches it.
Wow.
And we walked into this restaurant and he said, this is the restaurant in the first episode of that season. And because he was a fan, they sat us at the chef's counter.
Oh, come on now.
Watch the kitchen.
Oh.
And we had our 4 courses and it was lovely.
Gosh.
So yeah, we're living that life. And because it was Wisconsin prices, fantastic meal for much less than you would get it in Washington, D.C. And then I ended up over at a...
You thought the bill was just for the appetizer. You're missing the rest of the meal.
And then I ended up over at a party that a friend was throwing, which was very nice, at a little kind of a loft type facility, because she is one of my more liberal friends, and so she was having a party like that had cool things like art and a DJ. It's different from a normal RNC party, and so we went to that for a bit, and then came back to the hotel where everyone in the media world is staying. I have to brag just a little bit. I was telling Vic before the show, I've never warranted being at the Close Hotel before. When you're at the convention, you usually end up 45 minutes from the convention. You have to Uber in every day to spend your day at the
very
convention.
far. Yeah.
I am several blocks from the convention this year. So I was #blessed with a room at this very close hotel, but there is quite a...
You have arrived, Mary Catherine. You have arrived.
I guess so. It's quite a roll call at the Hyatt breakfast buffet in the morning. So it's nice to see. It's nice to see a bunch of people that I don't normally see.
Are there line cutters at the buffet, or is people generally polite, or do people just
everyone's been quite civilized, I would say.
At the omelet bar, at the toaster?
There are people I'm glad to see that I haven't seen in a while. There are people I'm not as glad to see that I haven't seen in a while. It's like, it could go either way.
Name names. Come on.
So that's what's going on. But we have newsy news to talk about. Let's first get to... I feel like the assassination attempt story has so many angles, and I don't want to disrespect any of the angles by moving too quickly past it, and yet there's just so much to talk about. Let's talk about Trump's reemergence into the RNC hall yesterday. And we are going to talk about Veepstakes, obviously, but I want to talk about this because it was highly anticipated. I was anticipating it because you cannot write a better recipe for unity in the party than that moment Saturday. A traumatic and tragic way to come about it. And we are so lucky that things didn't go worse. And yet the result is, of course, that everyone is like over the moon to
Right.
see him walk into a room, able-bodied. He's got a bandage on his ear, and we can play a little bit of the raucous
Yes.
electric welcome that he got inside the hall from his delegates. And
With a
frank
live performance, Mary Catherine. A live
That's
performance
true.
from Lee Greenwood.
From Lee Greenwood singing God Bless the USA. Here we go.
Yeah.
From sea to shining sea. Ladies and gentlemen, the 45th President of the United States and soon to be the 47th President of the United States, please welcome Donald J. Trump.
Okay, so exciting for everyone. I actually was not.
Can I say
Go
something
ahead.
before I forget?
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
just when right before it started, and Lee Greenwood's out there, and the president of the the former president is there, and it's a very emotional moment. I thought it was fun. I thought it would have been funny if Lee had said, "Now I'd like to play a new song from my upcoming album," and it's like not something that they didn't expect. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Can
Go
I
ahead.
can I say that I once interviewed Lee
Yeah.
Greenwood when
Ooh.
he was in town at my very small town where I worked at the newspaper. I interviewed him, and he was in. I feel like now he's in the embrace God Bless the USA phase of his career, but at that point he had not yet
Oh,
gotten there,
yeah.
and he didn't want to answer my questions about that, and I just was like,
Wow. Yeah.
not
Now
in a
he
not in a
decided to
rude.
own it.
It wasn't, like, super awkward, but it was
Yeah.
clear that this was not the
Uh-huh.
line of questioning he
Uh-huh.
wanted. I sorry, this is a very brief aside, and then we're gonna get back
No,
to the
please,
important
no, no.
stuff.
This is gonna happen throughout. This is gonna be
But yes,
unavoidable to our
yesterday,
listeners.
you know who exemplifies owning their big hit is Alfonso Ribeiro. Alfonso Ribeiro
From Fresh Prince?
Alfonso Ribeiro, best known as playing Carlton on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Yeah.
He was in a charity golf tournament just yesterday, and a clip goes viral because he drives and ends up on the green. It's a great shot, and the camera comes back to him, and what does he do?
Oh,
He does the Carlton. He does the
yes.
Carlton. He is best known for this silly, terrible dance, right? That's supposed
Yes.
to be goofy. And I would like to note, Alfonso Ribeiro first made his name as a dancer.
Yep.
He is a
Kid
dancer.
dancer.
And he's a
In
very
what commercial? In what commercial, Mary Cat?
Pepsi.
With?
Taste of a New Generation with Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
And the idea that he, despite the fact that he's this fantastic trained dancer and is known for this very silly dance, he's like, give the people what they want. The Carlton is what they want. Okay, so anyway, speaking of giving the people what they
Okay.
want,
And I'm gonna drive people are going nuts now because you know what? I'm going off of your tangent. I'm going on a slightly
Okay,
further.
go.
I'm going slightly further on a tangent, which is Gary Shandling and the Larry Sanders Show. He has the late night talk show, and they have a guest is Warren Zevon, the musician and singer. And then, of course, they ask him to play the song that he is so tired of playing, which is Werewolf in London.
Oh, I love that
And
song.
it's the same. I'm sure Lee Greenwood was like that at the time with you, but eventually, Okay, sorry.
Yeah, okay. So, speaking of giving the people what they want, former President Trump enters the arena here in Milwaukee, the Fiserv Forum, which is frankly doesn't really roll off the tongue. He
And it's
enters.
Feist. It's not Fist. It's Feist.
Yes. So, what struck me, and I watched it several times. I was not in the building. But you could feel it even just watching it on TV. What struck me was particularly seeing the close-ups of him as he walked in, and
Oh,
throughout the night as he was sitting in his seat or standing in his spot, he had a look on his face that I don't think I've ever seen on Donald Trump's face before. And I've been watching him for quite a long time, as
yeah,
we all have. He seemed genuinely emotional.
yeah.
He seemed, and don't let him hear this so that he gets offended and goes the other way, but he seemed softer, like
Yes.
just perhaps grateful, perhaps
Right.
overwhelmed by the import of this moment, by the fact that he could have been dead 2 days ago. I don't know. Like, I don't know how much to read into that, but certainly his behavior has been different for the last month. It started
Sure.
before the assassination attempt, but certainly
Right.
what I saw on his face last night, particularly as he was entering, and then as they were doing the prayer, which I also want to play a clip of, his face just looked different.
Same. Obviously, I was in the other room and I was just telling my family, let me know when he comes out. And all of a sudden you hear the commotion. I come out and take a look at him. The camera, it's great to be watching it on TV because if you're there, you could see it on the big television, but watching it on television, you see up close and personal and you see the expression on his face. And it's not one that I think I've seen before because as you know, he hates crybabies. He does not like men who cry. That might have been an issue with Doug Burgum, but he's not necessarily a fan of that. And of course, yes, he is older. He is 78 and he had this near death experience. And not just near death, like, oh, I had to get treatment. I had to go to the hospital because I was sick, but rather I almost died from a bullet. I was
on
almost
national
murdered
TV, right?
on national TV. I was almost murdered. And that just can't help but change you, even somebody like Donald Trump. And now, maybe the rhetoric might be the same. The truths seem to be the same. Policies, his selection of Vance, which we'll talk about later, seems to me on brand. But all that said, it can't help but change you. And I know as we're taping this, a leaked phone conversation has come out between Trump and Robert Kennedy Jr. that happened to have been taped by his son.
Oh.
And he put it on his own, whatever, Instagram or whatever his site is. And so now that's going around and he's having a conversation. And you think about how, they're talking about vaccines, fine. But, he's talking to somebody whose own father was murdered by an assassin, a lone gunman. And that's a moment. And that can't help but affect both of those men on that conversation. I know they're talking about, somehow bringing Robert Kennedy into the fold somehow, and that's it. If that happens, it's all over. Because you got the Teamsters and everything else, but we'll talk about it later. Yeah. But yeah, he seemed different and he seemed emotional but I thought it was a good thing.
By the way, one of the few actual moments of unity in the wake of this is the almost uniform bipartisan calls for RFK Jr. to get Secret Service coverage, which seems like a real no-brainer to me.
Right.
I want to play a blessing from Reverend James Romke of Kenosha's Messiah Lutheran Church. And this moment is kind of an illustration of the great combo that Trump can bring to a convention, which is a sense of gravitas because of this terrible thing that happened, but then you add in a Donald Trump impression. And this is what you
Yes.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Great pleasure to see President Donald Trump safe. And if I may, before the benediction, give you this promise. You're going to be so blessed. You're going to be tired of being blessed. I guarantee it.
So that moment was great. Donald Trump's enjoying it. We're all like, you need a moment of levity because it's very heavy.
Yeah.
That he's here and we're praying to God. By the way, there was a Politico headline that said Republicans continue to thank divine intervention for sparing the life of Donald Trump. Like, guys, this is what normal people do.
Republicans continue to believe in magic, spells.
Republicans continue to pray for God's protection over country.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Snark. It was a very interfaith day, Mary Catherine, because they opened with the Archbishop of Milwaukee giving the blessing, and you mentioned the Lutheran minister who does a great impression, and it did. It was a much needed laugh. And at the end, they had the woman who prayed.
Dillon. Yeah.
Yes, Harmeet Dillon, who prayed in Hindi, and that was also interesting, of course. But then you remember, in addition to being just generally interfaith, and this is a good thing, that J.D. Vance's wife, of course, is Indian.
Yeah. Yes. I thought, what did you think of the fact that it had this interfaith sort of message or bent to it? I think there are some on the cantankerous alt-right internet who are like, how dare?
Yes.
Are we leaning into what the MSM says we should do? It's like, no, we're just. I think actually the Republican Party in the future is going to increasingly become a place for anyone of faith, because people of faith are really not welcome in elite Democratic circles.
That's right. And there's a very, I think about this with, people we know or whoever, and they have kids and the need for faith. And if when they don't have it, it's hard when you don't have answers to big questions. And it's sort of, it's good to be grounded in faith, that whatever the faith that might be, but it puts things in perspective, and that there's the other. I mean, you have all these issues and problems that affect our culture these days, and faith is, I think, a big missing part of that equation. And it's just not interfaith, as you know. It's also about people of various races and ethnicities, but the difference is they go up on stage and they stress what they have in common
Right.
with everybody else. It's about the commonality, and it's as opposed to the identitarian politics. So, it's not these individuals, how different I am from you all in the hall, but rather what brings us together. That's the difference. And I think it does drive some people, either in the media or on the left, insane, because, they see, oh, they had several speakers who were African American, and that drives them crazy. So they have to point out how they're bad in various ways.
I watched Amber Rose's speech.
Oh, yes.
Did you watch it?
Yeah.
It was really nice.
My understanding, and I think you might have mentioned this as well on X, that people across the board were complimenting that speech. And I don't know what they were expecting from it, but maybe they had no expectations. And they're like, wait a minute. Oh, that was really interesting.
No, I think I was snarky about it the other day, and I said, like, hope she doesn't get a primetime slot or something like that. But it was a lovely little speech. And so I apologize for having low expectations. Look, Amber Rose is
she's a model,
complicated pop culture figure who has an interesting and colorful past. And I thought the part where she sort of started on this journey by talking to her father about Trump, and he's a Trump supporter, and her dad says, no, he's not a racist. Where did you get this from? And and she starts doing her own research, which is a phrase that triggers many on the left and in the media, which I enjoyed. And I don't know, just like, it was a very sweet, straightforward speech from a pop culture figure, who is a beautiful woman, which is something that Trump enjoys, obviously. So that was interesting. We'll play a little bit of that from Amber Rose.
I did my research and looked into all things Donald Trump. People have to do their research. I watched all the rallies, and I started meeting so many of you, his red hat wearing supporters. I realized Donald Trump and his supporters don't care if you're black, white, gay, or straight. It's all love.
And then, of course, there's Sean O'Brien, head of the Teamsters. Okay, this is a story, Vic, that if not for the past 48 hours, would have been a seismic political story.
Yeah.
So the head of the Teamsters Union is going to address the RNC in primetime. Now, apparently how this came about is that Sean O'Brien, look, he understands where his rank and file is.
Yeah.
And his rank and file are not elite Democrats. Okay?
No.
And they're
that's
not
the shift.
They're becoming not Democratic voters anymore. He understands that, but he also is like beholden to some elite Democrats. So what he does is he says to both the DNC and the RNC, can I come speak? And apparently only the RNC got back to him.
Maybe the DNC is going to get back to him after last night and say, oh, wait a minute. We lost your email. Here it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, Sean, hi.
God. I have so many unreads.
Good buddy. So he gives a bit of a stem winder. He does not endorse Trump, but he speaks to working class voter issues, the kind of thing that has been a signature of Trump's populist bent, of his turning of the party toward this type of voter. So we'll play a little bit of that.
Of hearing from new, loud, and often critical voices. And I think we all can agree, whether people like him or they don't like him, in light of what happened to him on Saturday, he has proven to be one tough SOB.
Now, Vic, when Sean O'Brien took the stage, I thought, I know this guy, Sean O'Brien. I feel like we talked about him or something came up.
Oh, yes, we did.
On this very podcast you'll remember, we handicapped a fight between Senator Markwayne Mullen,
That's right.
Republican of Oklahoma, and Teamster Sean O'Brien, who in a hearing got into it verbally enough for Markwayne Mullen to say, okay, let's go. Let's
Yeah.
just go.
We're going to throw it down right
we
now.
we should refresh everyone with that clip.
Sir, I wish you was in the truck with me when I was building my plumbing company. Myself and my wife was running the office because I sure remember working pretty hard and long hours. Pretends like he's self-made. What a clown. Fraud. Always has been, always will be. Quit the tough guy act in these Senate hearings. You know where to find me. Any place, anytime, cowboy. Sir, this is a time, this is a place. If you want to run your mouth, we can be two consenting adults. We can finish it here.
Okay, that's fine. Perfect.
You want to do it now?
I'd love to do it right now.
Well, stand your butt up then.
You stand your butt up.
Oh, hold on.
Big
Oh,
guy.
hold, stop it.
Is that your
All right.
solution?
Hold it. No, sit down.
Sorry, Eric,
Sit down.
Okay.
You know, you're a United States Senator. Sit down.
Actively.
Oh, okay.
Sit down, please.
All right.
Can I respond? Mr.
Hold
Chairman?
it. Hold it.
So now O'Brien
Yeah.
is speaking at the RNC. I hope he runs into Markwayne at a cocktail party or something.
Yeah. In the hall. You never know.
Or at the PBR packing company or something. Maybe they'll go for a tour over there. Anyway,
Right.
or could we just set up an octagon at the RNC for them?
Yes, yeah, like Thunderdome, you really 2 men enter, 1 man leave. I mean,
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. But no, I mean, as you mentioned, that is it's a seismic shift. But they know this has been happening for some time now. Working class Americans have been shifting towards Republicans, whereas elites and the college educateds have been shifting towards the left. And he obviously recognizes that. And yeah, he's a tough guy. He comes from a fine tradition. Going back
fine
to
tradition.
Jimmy Hoffa, Tony
storied-
Provenzano,
A storied and violent tradition of
yeah, I mean, yeah,
union enforcement.
yeah, that's right. I mean, they'll put you 6 feet under. You never
Yeah.
know. I mean, I'm just kidding, but in any event, that
Mark
was
Wayne will
big.
protect you.
Yeah,
Vic,
that's
don't
right.
worry.
And I don't, I wasn't sure what he was going to say, but he complimented Donald Trump in the most Teamster way, which is to say, after having survived that bullet, he is one tough SOB, and people love that.
I mean, very hard to
And
deny.
I'll take it.
Very-
Take that. That's it.
It's a great compliment.
Now, Mary Catherine, can I ask you something?
Yes.
Did you, of all the speeches that you were looking forward to last night, the one that you were most excited about, can I guess?
Sure.
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah, not my cup of tea.
Okay.
Look, I think
David Sachs. Yeah.
no. Oh, well, so this is a good time to talk about sort of where the party's headed as
Yeah.
illustrated by the VP pick. And the VP pick is very young, 39-year-old Senator J.D. Vance of the state of Ohio. I think missed opportunity. Like that was my gut. He was not top of my list. Of the 3 who we heard were finalists, I would have preferred one of the other 2. I never thought the Youngkin thing would happen. He's the Virginia governor, very, very popular figure. 1 term in Virginia, he can't run again. So it would have been a nice move for him, but I never thought that was possible. He just seemed too normy and too popular.
He was also on the list of speakers already, and I thought, well, if he's
Yeah.
speaking now, he's not going to speak again on Thursday.
Right. And so then, although they could always shift that. And then I hoped for Burgum because Burgum is sort of a Youngkin-like figure, but not as suburban reading, And I thought, yeah, Burgum's got the hair and he's rich and
Right.
Trump will like those things. Anyway, I didn't think it would be Vance for this reason. The breadcrumbs were too clear. It just seemed like, oh, he's going to switcheroo on us. But he did not switcheroo
Too
on
obvious.
us. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
it seemed too obvious because we got a lot of signals from the lineup on
Yeah.
Wednesday night, all being like Ohio, and then Donald Trump Jr., who is a friend of Vance's,
Mm-hmm.
which, in hindsight, it's like, oh, if those guys are friends, that makes a lot of sense. Donald Trump's family has immense influence over him. His son has immense influence, a way in which the current president and the former president are alike. Although I would say Donald Trump Jr.'s judgment, I will take any day over
Hunter's.
Hunter Biden's. So anyway, it's Vance. So I think that took a little wind out of my sails for, a Youngkin and a Tim Scott speech, and speeches that I
Yeah.
would enjoy and did enjoy, but because they suddenly became also rans in this in this
Yeah.
party
Mhm.
structure, I was not as enthused as I might otherwise have been. Although they were very good speeches. What do you think about the Vance pick?
Well, the first thing, Mary Catherine, is listeners know on the show, I called it because of one syllable.
You
Trump,
really
Trump
did.
Vance. Trump
It's
Vance.
it's a large part of it. I think it's
I
probably a
haven't
large
been.
part of it.
I know that, yes, I know there was a lot of pressure, as you mentioned, from Donnie Jr. and from even and Tucker Carlson, apparently, and,
I
and,
also
and
heard that
certainly Elon Musk.
I heard from a friend who is closer to Trump world than I am that Susie Wiles is
Oh
a
boy.
is a Vance
Well, there you
fan.
go. Yeah. I just didn't think that he needed Vance. And obviously we have very different opinions on Vance 2.0, I should say. Vance 2024. I
Yes.
have a lot of disagreements with versus Vance 2016 or 2015,
Mhm.
particularly on foreign policy. And he's been very vocal, and he is on record. He is captured, and recorded as saying he couldn't care less about Ukraine, whatever happens on one side or the other. He's going to have to, I mean, I'm sure he's clarified that since, but the question is, okay, if not Ukraine, what about other overseas commitments? What about Korea? What about Taiwan or whatever? Those are concerns. He certainly did a big 180, and maybe that's to his advantage because people are going to say, you called Trump reprehensible and an idiot and everything else. What do you how can you support this guy? And he makes that case, and he's already made it the case today that, look, I was there. I had my doubts. I was skeptical. But over the next 4 years plus, he has convinced me otherwise. Okay,
Well,
fine.
and
Yeah.
because this question will come up over and over again, it's worth hearing what his answer is on Hannity last night when asked exactly this.
About Ukraine, you've been a critic of President Biden's policies. What should the policy be?
Well, very simple, Sean. We have to point this out. Russia would not have invaded Ukraine if Donald Trump had been president. Everybody agrees with it. Even a lot of my Democratic colleagues privately agree with that. But here's the issue, Sean, is we've now spent $200 billion. What's the goal? What are we trying to accomplish? Is there a risk of escalation into nuclear war? Because there is when you have a buffoon running foreign policy, and we've got a lot of them right now in Washington, D.C. I think what President Trump has promised to do is go in there, negotiate with the Russians and Ukrainians, bring this thing to a rapid close so that America can focus on the real issue, which is China.
That's right. And I also didn't think Trump needed Vance for any electoral or demographic reasons. But I mean, obviously, because Ohio is already out of play for the Democrats, they've pretty much given up on that. I mean, don't tell that to Sherrod Brown, who's running in the Senate,
Yeah.
but they're not going to try hard to win Ohio the way Democrats used to try in 2000, 2004, or 2008. But if the strategy is that crumbling blue wall that the Democrats have, Pennsylvania, the Midwest in general, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and pushing that, completely toppling that blue wall, then I guess he achieved that. So rather than trying to worry about winning, I mean, if he picked Rubio, there was the whole thing, as we've been talking about, and as you've first mentioned on the show, about both of them having residency in the same state, which I think
Yes.
is a problem for the 12th Amendment. It's too much of a pain at this point. So, but again, if they're chasing after votes, Biden cannot afford to lose Pennsylvania in almost any scenario. And he's already down maybe 4 or 5 points. If he loses Michigan because the voters are depressed because of what's happening in the Middle East, Wisconsin for that matter. And he mentioned that, and I will say this and bring it back to you, which is in Trump's truth, if you want to call it that, his tweet on Truth Social, he says, quote, that JD Vance will be focused on, quote, the American workers and farmers in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Minnesota, and far beyond. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
that's there.
So I have a lot of thought. I feel like, speaking of complicated figures,
Right.
JD Vance is one. I used to work with him on air at CNN and other places. I've been on panels with him in his 2015-16 iteration, and there's obviously room to change your mind on Donald Trump. I have moved on Donald Trump since 2015 and
I'm sure
16,
a lot of people have.
partly because of there were many successes during his term. The Supreme Court justices were extremely solid picks. He followed through. He kept his word. The Biden contrast is important. It's been not good several years. So yeah, I do think the switch to like such a populist acolyte has been notable. Now, let me do the bio, because the bio is pretty amazing. Like, he grows up in
Yeah.
poverty. He has sort of an Appalachian pedigree. He enlists in the Marines out of high school post 9/11. That is a character moment. I
Right.
appreciate that there's a veteran on a ticket. I
For the
don't think
first time
for the first time
since
since McCain, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
since 2008.
I
Yeah.
checked it last night to make sure I was right. First time a veteran on a ticket since McCain, and he was in the service during the post 9/11 period. That's a big deal. He
And
then
don't forget his exposure firsthand to drugs and the effects of drug addiction.
Yes, he then goes on to poverty and addiction is like a very
His
dysfunctional
mother.
upbringing.
Yeah.
He then goes to Ohio State. He then goes to Yale Law, whereas
Yeah.
he is convinced by a professor to write his memoir. He writes his memoir called Hillbilly Elegy. Many of you, it became like a real pop culture
Yeah.
touchstone, a
Yeah, it was a
literary
big
touchstone.
everybody was
In
talking about it.
2015 or 2016, won a ton of awards. It became the unofficial guidebook for understanding Trump voters. I did like this about Vance always. He was sympathetic and understanding of
Yeah.
voters who liked Trump. And he would say, this is why they like him. And so I appreciated that part about him. Now, he was highly critical of Trump back then. I have heard look, I was around when he would say critical things, but I never heard him say the Hitler comparisons. Apparently, he got really blistering at times.
Sure. He got worked up.
That footage, those quotes, will come back to haunt this ticket. Trump was willing to take that chance. And so I just want to say, like, on a bio level, just a very compelling story. He's got a beautiful wife, a daughter of Indian immigrants to America, a star in her own right. She has clerked for both Kavanaugh and Roberts. Kavanaugh at a lower level before he went to Supreme Court, and Roberts. They have 3 beautiful young children. He also worked in business, I believe, in VC, and was fairly successful in that world as
Peter
well.
Thiel. Peter Thiel world.
Yes,
right.
Which is another part of this, by the way. He is not just he much like Trump. He has his foot in 2 very different worlds, right?
Yeah.
He was an elite media darling. He is a working class appealing sort of guy who came from a working class background authentically and has an American dream story. He also is very friendly with the right-leaning tech bro community. And that brings a ton of money.
Yes.
That is important to Trump and to the party. So he's a really interesting character. I have many disagreements with him on policy.
Yeah.
And what I think this is, because he didn't need it electorally, I'm going to steal this from Kristen Soltis Anderson. She made an interesting comparison. This is the Trump world version of Romney-Ryan. When Romney picked Ryan, he didn't gain a state. I mean, it's Wisconsin. Technically, maybe you could argue that you could shave a few points, but
Wisconsin 2012 was not within reach.
Ryan was a base consolidating, ideological, we like this kind of policy pick.
Yeah.
And he liked the guy, and he thought he was young and promising.
And he's a good guy.
Again, credit to Kristen Soltis Anderson for this point, but I think it's correct. Trump likes the guy. He's young and promising. It is not a reach out to suburban women voters pick. It is a pick that consolidates the base. I don't think it earns him any extra votes. He had 112% of Trump voters who were going to vote Trump were coming out anyway after Saturday, right? We don't there was no question about that. This puts an intellectual person. By the way, he's very, very smart. Just to
he's going to be formidable in an upcoming vice presidential debate.
Oh my God. Yeah, we can talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
This puts an intellectual figure as the heir apparent to the Trump populist turn in the Republican Party. And I think what it cements, or what its attempt to cement, is that the party will not revert to its former
that's right.
more establishment, free market
neocon
position. Or even like limited government position after Trump has left the stage.
That's right.
So that, you know what, look, on one hand, I wrote about this and said, look, I very much like J.D. Vance personally, and my personal interactions with him, lovely person.
Yeah.
I think he's very smart. I think he speaks well. I think when you watch him give a speech, you'll be like, oh, he seems nice and normal and smart.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, he probably talks more fluently about policy
Yeah.
than any of the people on either ticket.
Right. That's why, I mean, it's really going to be interesting.
So there's that, but he's not a play for me, right?
Right.
Uh,
Or me.
yes, and
Or,
we
yeah,
are
obviously.
a form of semi-disaffected GOP voter that
Right.
you could sort of open the tent to with a more, I don't want to use the term establishment because Youngkin's not really establishment. He came into the party much later, but you know what I'm saying? Like the normie
Yes.
Republican fleece
Right.
vest wearing kind of deal. It wasn't a play for us. And I think there was an opportunity to build a bigger coalition by doing something like that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
However, I know my limitations, Vic, and I want to say it wasn't my plan that brought more Black and Hispanic voters into the GOP, right?
Right.
It's not
Right.
the
The
way.
autopsy, the 2012 autopsy. Remember that?
Yeah,
How do
it's-
we bring these people in? That was not
and,
the, that was
and
not the
Trump went and
recommendation.
did the opposite,
Yeah.
and he succeeded. Okay,
You're going to see more minority voters among Hispanics and African Americans voting for Trump than any Republican since, I don't know, maybe 56, 60. I don't even know. Since going way back.
yeah. So like, I understand that, and so I have to have the humility to say this play
Mhm.
for perhaps a more working class style voter with the Teamsters guy with JD as the pick is a play that will continue that widening of the coalition, but perhaps
It's
at
going
the
in that
expense,
direction.
perhaps at the expense
Yes.
of my normie mom friends. However, I told you I have a lot of thoughts on this. However, and this is important to Trump too, Vance made his name as sort of a literary figure.
Mhm.
But Hillbilly Elegy was so widely read and then made into a movie in 2020 starring
Directed by Ron Howard.
Ron
Yeah.
Howard movie starring Glenn Close and Amy Adams. His first introduction to normal voters is as a pop culture figure.
Yeah.
Because my friends who they're not super into politics, were asking about him, and I gave them the brief bio in a dispassionate way so they can make their own decisions about him. And they all go, "Oh, he's the Hillbilly Elegy guy? That was such a sad story.
Yeah.
How beautiful that he
Yeah.
has risen to this position. How impressive."
Right.
Oh, I watched that movie. That was the movie with Glenn Close, right? Okay. The pop cultural part of this, I think, is important because everybody who wants to know anything about this guy can go watch a very flattering, portrayal of his struggle and rise on Netflix.
Right.
The bio's there, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to,
Or read a very accessible book.
or read the book, which is, renowned and
Yeah.
critically acclaimed, right? So that's an interesting thing because I know that every suburban mom voter in the world read Hillbilly Elegy in 2000. It was in every book
Yeah.
club, okay? Every book
Right.
club.
Of course. Yes.
So that is an interesting part of this as well. I don't know,
Yes.
man. I tend to think that, look, the play isn't for me. The play isn't for me. The party's going a different direction, and I have to decide how much I want to support it.
Yeah.
in that
You and I are continuing our quest to find our Scoop Jackson of this election. So to go back to when you were talking about Sean O'Brien and this move towards the populism angle for the future of the Republican Party, who does he mention? Who besides Trump, obviously, who does he give a shout out to in his speech was Josh Hawley.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, more evidence is going in that direction.
Another extremely smart, policy-minded populist. With
Right,
whom
not our cup of tea, but
with whom I disagree on a ton of things,
Same.
and who, by the way, I disagreed with far less in 2016-ish when I first met him, right?
Sure.
This is
Yeah.
definitely a shift happening.
Yeah. And then the other thing that you mentioned about his connection being a venture capitalist and in the tech world, which is now trying to be, it's being spun as a negative thing that he was in that world, of course. Oh, boo, a venture capitalist, that's bad. Here's the interesting thing. Do you remember one of the arguments for Trump choosing Doug Burgum as his running mate was because of the money? And remember, because he was being, he was drowning in legal fees.
Right.
And how he needed this help, and Burgum could bail him out because he's got a lot of money that he would pour into this campaign. But and Doug Burgum seems to me like a very nice guy. I know some people had some concerns about him, even in North Dakota. I love the guy.
I unabashedly love
nice
the guy.
guy. There was one of those Fox diner, interviews, and Burgum was going to be there, and obviously you figure it's safe to assume everybody who's there, they love Fox and that they're going to love Doug Burgum. And I think two people that were interviewed along the way to get to the Burgum interview at the diner were skeptical of Burgum. It was like, yikes, we got to move on to the next person. So I don't know. But the thing is, you
I
don't
love that
need
dude.
the
By the way, can I
yeah.
just say for Burgum,
Mhm.
really high social IQ,
Yeah.
great at giving
Oh,
interviews and connecting with people.
yeah, very.
I think he has a lot of the strengths, the exact strengths that
Yeah.
Vance does. Like
Sure.
came from a very tiny town, came up working class,
Yeah.
started his own chimney sweep side hustle when he was
Mhm.
in college or before college, went to Stanford, became a tech guy,
Right.
built this huge tech company that he kept in his state of North Dakota instead of
Yeah.
moving.
That's right.
Sold it to Microsoft. So like has a lot of those
Yeah, he worked with Bill Gates. Yeah.
same inflection points, but in a different package. So
Right.
can I
Uh,
add?
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna so but I was just gonna say, but you don't need that money if Elon Musk is telling you, I really like JD Vance and I will give you 45 not $45 million a month. A month
Yeah,
until election day.
Let's just repeat that.
Yeah.
$45 million a month.
Right. To the super
Which is
PAC.
also, that's what I make doing this podcast, FYI.
And then yes, of course. What? I only make 20.
I shouldn't have
I
told
only
you.
make 20 per episode. Okay,
You're like
you
that
had
meme. You're like that meme where it's like, wait, you're getting paid for this?
That's right. I think you had a thought, and I just wanted to say one quick thing, and then and back to you, which was the other thing that is interesting. I got you get all these emails from various political groups, Republicans, Democrats, candidates. We've been inundated for the last year. As soon as JD Vance was announced, I received an email from a left-wing group called Indian American Impact, denouncing Vance as extreme. And I thought that was interesting considering, of course, and perhaps intentionally, because people are going to be talking about his lovely and very intelligent wife, Usha, who is, as you mentioned, she is Indian. She is Hindu. She clerked. She's a lawyer, and they're on it. They just want to know her own people have turned her away, Mary Catherine, just in case you're wondering.
Rude.
Okay.
Rude. So I want to say one more thing. Again, he was not my first choice, but let me defend him against the argument that he is so very unqualified, right? To be one heartbeat away. Look, I think I would prefer someone with executive experience because I think if you want to do what Trump claims to want to do and to do any sort of draining of the swamp that might actually be effective, you need to get your hands around a giant bureaucracy and be able to tame it in some workable ways. I think DeSantis, Burgum, and Youngkin have more skills demonstrated for doing that kind of thing than
they're governors, which is like basically ruling a small country in the United States compared to other countries in Europe, rather.
Whereas Vance does not have that on his resume. However, the Democratic Party nominated a man for the presidency who was a handful of years older than Vance, had been in the U.S. Senate for 14 seconds, who was best known for a moving memoir, and had only jobs as a community organizer before he became a politician, and notably, unlike Vance, had not served in the United States Marine Corps during wartime. So I won't be listening to that. Also, their current VP on that side is just, well, you can see. What? But did you see? There were tweets last night that were like, I can't wait to see Kamala destroy him in a debate.
Oh, come on. Nobody said that. Are you kidding me?
It had to be satire, right?
It's like the one thing that you can't imagine is, I mean, that's the one thing that is like, we'll say what you will about Vance, but he's very smart.
He's very smart.
And he could talk about a lot of issues in depth, and clips have been going out about him, especially on military issues. So even he knows what the attack is going to be on him from multiple angles, right? They're going to ask him about Ukraine. They're going to ask him about what he said about Donald Trump. I am sure. I mean, I have the same questions. I was thinking about this. If I were Harris, I would say you called him noxious or whatever. But I am sure that he is not going to be caught flat-footed.
Well, can I tell you?
He's going to have answers.
There's a nice thing about being a smart guy, which is that you anticipate these questions and
Yeah.
you think through how you would answer
Right.
them. And
Right.
I have really been longing for someone like that in the upper
Right.
echelon of national politics for a while, because
Yeah.
we got a bunch of people right now who do not think through things and who do
No.
not understand what questions might come at them.
People are still nostalgic, by the way, for I guess it was the 2004 vice presidential debate of Dick Cheney versus Joe Lieberman. I think that's what it was, wasn't it? Was that,
Yeah.
no, it was Kerry. No, it would have been 2000. It would have been 2000,
2000, yeah.
which was Cheney Lieberman. And it was like, at the end of that debate, it was like, huh, that was nice.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
regardless of how you felt, it's like, and we haven't seen anything like that since. So,
I don't think we're going back there. Okay. I guess some of the Obama-Romney debates were sort of normal-ish. Especially, I did enjoy the one where Romney just kicked his ass. That was so fun to watch. Okay. I think we're good on this front. And actually, it transitions nicely to someone not ever anticipating what questions he might be asked,
Oh,
who
boy.
is the President of the United States of America.
yes, the current.
President Joe Biden did this was a taped interview, correct?
Yes, I guess. But yeah.
Taped interview with Lester Holt, which aired last night during the events on the floor at the RNC. Okay,
Really bad timing.
really bad timing. Just as a scheduling thing, after Saturday, certainly, the party at large, and I think the rank and file of the party didn't really want to get rid of Biden anyway. They didn't see how that was workable. There were people polled who said, yeah, sure, but like there wasn't a plan for it. I think the elite were more obsessed with it than the rank and file were, who had already baked in his infirmities into their vote.
Yes.
The momentum had stopped. Like he could have just, speaking of, he could have taken a page out of Trump's book and just
Yeah.
shut his mouth for a week. After addressing the shooting, obviously, the assassination attempt, but he didn't. Instead, he takes 3 feeble bites at the apple at the assassination attempt and then does a taped interview for the Monday of the opening of the RNC, which he totally flubs,
Yeah.
somehow, despite all of this, reigniting the discussion about how they should maybe get rid of him.
So again,
He
the timing,
has a superpower. He has a superpower.
he has it's a reverse on himself. The timing could not have been worse. It's like finding, like what do you do if you ever check out another network during the Super Bowl and what they're airing? It's usually a rerun of Nash Bridges,
Right.
or or NCIS. I mean, that's it. That's all we got is a rerun of NCIS. And there he is. And I'll tell you a brief aside. I was surprised at how old Lester Holt looked. He looked much older. I don't know. I'm all for hair dyeing. I'm not that I dye my own hair. I have very little hair, but I'm all for that. I think there's nothing wrong with that. But there were a lot of things that happened at that Biden NBC interview that we could discuss, obviously, of concern. Beginning, for example, with Lester Holt asking him about the language that he used with donors, saying that we need that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy and that we need to put him in the crosshairs, in the bullseye, rather. This is funny. He says the bullseye. Obviously, this is something that was shared among donors. This was not something that he was saying in public. So I'm not making any sort of comparison, but they were asking, Lester Holt asked about the rhetoric and, was that a good thing to say? I understood what Biden was trying to say, which is what you can't say these things anymore. It's a war against language. Oh, you're going to take things the wrong way, but you can't have it both ways. That's the first thing, by saying that their side says terrible things and that you can say whatever you want. And the second thing is he seems to have gotten confused with the argument over whether he said bullseye or crosshairs.
Right.
And at some point he says, no, I said crosshairs. I should have said bullseye. And Lester should have been like, oh, actually, you said bullseye.
We can play that clip.
You called your opponent an existential threat on a call a week ago. You said it's time to put Trump in the bullseye. There's some dispute about the context, but I think you appreciate that
I didn't say
words matter.
crosshairs. I was talking about focus on. Look, the truth of the matter was, what I guess I was talking about at the time was there was very little focus on Trump's agenda.
Yeah, the term is bullseye.
It was a mistake to use the word. I didn't say crosshairs. I meant bullseye. I meant focus on him. Focus on what he's doing.
Jonathan Chait, by the way, who is a Democratic and a left-leaning writer, writes, Lester Holt very smoothly interprets the guttural sounds as if they were coherent, kind of like Han Solo responding to Chewbacca.
Yeah, no, that really is true. I laughed when I saw that.
So Biden, I think somewhat off-puttingly, has been putting up pictures on social media of him like in a situation room with all his briefing
Right, he's on it.
folks. he's on this almost assassination of Donald Trump, which is like, I'm not sure this is your moment to look presidential. There was a pretty big failure here. And I know that no one resigns anymore, but the woman, Kimberly Cheadle, who is head of the Secret Service, should have by now. Anyway, maybe the reason she hasn't is because the president doesn't know that the head of the Secret Service is a woman. Here's this clip.
Is it acceptable that you have still not heard, at least publicly, from the Secret Service director?
Well, I've heard from him.
But have you heard from her publicly?
Publicly, I've sat down in a situation room downstairs with the Secret Service, the FBI, the national security agencies, the Homeland Security, all the major elements.
He's talked to him, Vic.
Okay.
He's surely talked to him.
Let me defend him. Let me defend him. The first thing is, among certain languages, for example, in Tagalog, there is no he or she. So my father will always say like, "Oh yeah, I was talking to your sister's friend, this other and he's so nice." I would go, "Who? Jane? Jane is a he now? What happened?" And they do he, she all the time.
Okay.
Oh, my sister's husband. She was at the house the other day. Oh my gosh, my brother-in-law.
You're telling me this is a sophisticated play for
Yeah,
Filipino American
because
voters. Yes.
that's right. That's what the he, she, they get it mixed up. Or alternatively, he thinks that he hired as Secret Service director Don Cheadle. And I would hire Don Cheadle for Secret Service.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
but other than that,
this misgendering does not engender confidence in what's happening over at the White House. I mean, I just think this interview is, you don't have to analyze it very much. You can just watch it and say, yikes.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to be flippant about it. It's just not impressive. It's a little bit disturbing at times. This is not a person who I think is in control of this job.
Yeah. So, I mean, with regard to Kimberly Cheadle, it is like, the captain usually would go down with the ship. She'd be like on the lifeboat in the Titanic. She'd be like with Molly Brown.
No, she's the Billy Zane character.
Oh, even worse, Mary Catherine. That's terrible.
Okay.
It's horrible.
So we have a clip of her, by the way.
Yeah.
Kimberly Cheadle, by the way, has done at least one interview. And this is her take on who's at fault for this very large security breach.
Who is most responsible for this happening?
What I would say is that the Secret Service is responsible for the protection of the former president.
So the buck stops with you?
The buck stops with me. I am the director of the Secret Service. It was unacceptable, and it's something that shouldn't happen again. The president and Homeland Security Secretary said today they had 100% confidence in you, but there are some members of Congress calling on you to resign. I appreciate the Secretary's comments, and we're going to continue to be transparent and communicate with people. Do you plan to stay on? Absolutely. I do plan to stay on.
Classic modern era politics. The buck stops with her, but she won't be like living her life any differently. She's not going to leave or
it's
resign
it's just a phrase. I'm not sure what it means.
It's like you just stand up and you're like, I am taking responsibility in this moment by doing nothing different than I was doing the last moment.
Right. Well, it did make, she did pause for a few seconds before, should I say yes or no? Because I guess that means I'm the boss, but it certainly can't mean that I'm going to take responsibility for this. Or I could take responsibility and promise just to do better.
No, she went for it because she knows Biden ain't going to do nothing.
Right.
Nobody's going after. Nobody's going to fire her.
That's right.
And this is, by the way, part of the problem with all this, because like as we speak, conspiracy theories are proliferating. And like, here's the thing. We are moderately right and moderately reliable. I'm not looking to spread misinformation, but I understand why people are skeptical. I am so glad that there are like 5 agencies and the oversight committees doing investigations, because the oversight committee must be part of it, because every other federal agency charged with doing this kind of investigation and indeed with protecting the former president has also been abused to go after the former president.
Right.
So people are within their rights to be concerned about whether they're being told the truth.
Right.
And I hope that people's investigations are circumspect and thorough and that they are very transparent. But when no one takes accountability, you get continued loss of public trust. It just cascades.
And with quite possible terrible consequences. And obviously there were terrible consequences because somebody died.
Yeah.
So there we are.
By the way, can I say real quick, because I tweeted about this, the widow of Corey Comparatori did a interview, I think with the New York Post, maybe.
Huh.
And she said that Biden had called her
Wow.
and that she didn't take that call. And there was some suggestion that she didn't take that call because, frankly, her husband wasn't a giant Biden fan and she's mourning him and he was killed at a Trump rally. And
Yeah.
I tweeted about it because I was like, look, everybody's going to pile on the widow because she didn't take her phone call from the
Right.
president. But this is absolutely her decision to make.
Yeah.
She is in a position almost none of you will ever be in. It is very public. It is very political. And she gets to make exactly what decision works for her and her family.
Yeah.
I, by the way, because I've been in a weirdly also political and public situation where I lost my husband suddenly, I declined a visit to the White House, an invitation to the White House 4 days after Jake died because I was not sure I could like stay on my feet, go through security.
Sure.
Grief can be very physical and physically tiring. And I also thought, this might make it more weirdly public and political if I go to the White House, if I talk to the president, if something like that comes to pass. And I didn't know how to handle that. And I am trained for public exposure. This is political public exposure. This is what I do. And I still didn't know how to handle everything. I sent a friend in my stead to the White House that day. She has no obligation to public figures. None. She has an obligation to her family, to her daughters. By the way, not only did she lose her husband 2 days ago, her life was threatened along with at least one of her daughters.
Oh,
So
sure.
she gets to make the calls here. The people were also going after Trump because apparently he hasn't called her yet, although he has said he would go to the funeral and they started a GoFundMe for
Oh,
her
yeah,
family.
which is
So
over 3 million. Yeah.
it's not as if he has done nothing. And by the way, when the time comes, the widow gets to make the decision about whether he comes to the funeral because a lot of people don't want that moment to be super public or to have
Right.
a spotlight
The
on it. So
the attention might shift. Yeah.
so anyway, I just want to shout out to Helen Comparatori. She is in my prayers. I am weirdly positioned to know some of what she is going through, and she gets to make the calls. Please show her the same amount of grace that all of you, particularly if you're left of center, show to the president himself, who lost his wife 50 years ago, and he has still extended grace on this front, or his son 9 years ago, and he has still extended grace on this front. So you can offer it to this woman 2 days after her husband died. And I will also say, like, I do think in this case, Biden sometimes uses his own personal tragedy inappropriately to connect with people. In this case, look, she has 2 daughters. She's going to be raising them alone. They're not super young, but she's going to be raising them alone right now.
Yeah.
It's something he actually has been through, right? Sudden loss, 2 kids to raise.
Yeah.
This is an analogous thing that it's nice of him to reach out. It's nice of people to reach out. But the person who is in crisis does not have an obligation to the people who reach out to her.
Right.
Biden sent me a note. I appreciated it. It was not an inappropriate moment for him to analogize his grief to mine because they were similar situations. What gets me is when he does it in situations that do not warrant it.
Right.
Anyway, those are my thoughts on public grieving. But I just wanted to stick up for her because I know there are going to be a lot of shit posting, excuse my language, about this thing.
Wow. Well, I'm not going to make my joke about I was going to make a joke about Biden being protected from poll numbers, like, instead of a porn filter, there's a filter for Real Clear Politics. I guess I just told it.
It's a great segue.
Sorry.
We need
I'm
to get,
sorry.
We're getting to something lighter.
Okay, but this is we are running. I think we're at our time limit over here. We haven't. Perhaps we could talk about this on the next episode about the case being dropped against him in the documents case, which was huge. All our listeners need to know is that Judge Eileen Cannon, she said that this was a violation of the appointments clause and that Jack Smith was wrongly appointed, which means that they can refile. The Justice Department can refile. They can try to take their case to the 11th Circuit if they want to do it. But for all intents and purposes, there is no trial, at least until election. And if Donald Trump wins, something tells me that case is going to be dropped. It is a race against time for the other side. So again, as people are saying, Trump has been extremely lucky. We say lucky. Some people, we say blessed. He's got a lot of grace on his side right now. Let's hope he makes the most of it.
Surely. No, look, we both went through 9/11, which is obviously the biggest news event I've ever lived through. But the last 3 weeks of news have been something else, Vic.
We love to have this tendency to say the moment we're in is the craziest moment ever. The election is more important, crazier than any election. We say this every 4 years, and you look back and say, "No, nothing was like this." Whatever. I hate to say it, but I really think this is the craziest time we've ever lived. Each of these stories individually would be a huge story. The assassination attempt on the president, an attempted internal palace coup against the sitting president by his own people. That's a big story, and it's all in one.
Ugh. What a week. Okay, well, we will continue with more coverage of all of these things as they come to pass. Should we close it out?
Let's close it out. That wraps up this episode of Getting Hammered. Remember, you can subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, and YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter at Victorino Mattis.
I'm at MK Hammer on Twitter, at MK Hammer Time on Instagram. You can find the show at Getting Hammered Podcast on YouTube or Instagram. You should watch us there. Thank you for getting hammered responsibly. This has been a Nebulous Media Podcast.